Joining me today for an enlightening conversation is Sufi teacher, author and co-founder of Threshold Society and the Baraka Institute, Kabir Helminski. Named as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world, Kabir became the first Westerner to be officially recognized as a sheikh of the Mevlevi order since 1990. Now, the Mevlevi tradition is over 750 years old and traces its inspiration on the teachings of the 13th century Muslim mystic and most popular poet in the world today, Rumi. Now, some of Kabir's books include Living Presence, The Knowing Heart, and Holistic Islam. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tazeen. Very happy to be here.
Kabir, let's begin a little bit about your own personal journey. How did an American end up being a student and teacher of Rumi?
From my early years, I was interested in mysticism. I'm not sure I knew what it was, but in my college years, I studied history of religions, primarily the religions of the Far East, and eventually I came around to learning about Sufism and Islam around the age of 30. And in Sufism, I found a really comprehensive understanding of the human being and of spiritual practice and a beautiful culture and a beautiful model of humanness, met with deep friendship among the teachers of this path as well as the travelers of this path. It took my heart. And this was after some familiarity with quite a variety of spiritual teachers who were coming to the West during especially the late 60s and 70s. I finally wound up in Konya, Turkey, in the home of a 80-something-year-old Turkish Sufi sheikh, and that felt like coming home to me, and it's been my home ever since.
But you were actually born into Christianity, is that right?
Yes, raised as a Catholic.
What was it about your own experience, let's say, as a child into your teenagers, that invoked that initial inquiry to go and search and look?
In my own experience and what I've seen of others' experiences, there are some people who, from an early age, just feel the call of something invisible, of something more than the conventional satisfactions of life. It's hard to say what that is. It's hard to know what we were looking for. But it's a sense you have inside yourself. And you keep looking for something that will satisfy that yearning, that thirst. And look through, in my own experience, the jazz scene of the Lower East Side of New York when I was a teenager, reading existential literature, again, around the same age, writing poetry, exploring poetry, searching for some sense of beauty and meaning. And you go through many stages of this, always looking for that which will truly satisfy the heart. And when I came to Sufism, I heard the saying of the tradition, indeed, in the remembrance of God, hearts find satisfaction. So this is kind of mysterious. What does that mean, remembrance of God? It's an internal experience of presence, of a sense of meaning, and in spiritual practice, in many forms of spiritual practice, I feel that people are learning to access something that is very close to themselves, something quite inner and yet real, in some ways more real than the external world, a state of being where we find peace, inner strength, contentment, no matter what the circumstances of life may be. So you begin to look beyond the circumstances of life. You begin to look beyond your own desires, which you've never managed to satisfy, no matter how hard you tried, to another state of being that's not clinging to those kinds of satisfactions, and you find that something within your own heart, within your own inner life, and that affects how you see outer life. And once you have a sense of that, a taste of that, an experience of that, you just want to deepen it, because it's it has infinite depths, and it becomes your life's practice, your spiritual journey, to know that state better and better, to remain with it more and more. And it's not an avoidance of life, it's what allows us, in fact, in the end, to embrace life.
In today's world, where we've got this increased connectivity and social media, how relevant is a path like Sufism, and how important is it more than ever before, say?
Well, it's like we're swimming against a huge tide of unconsciousness, consumerism, you named some of these things, but it's like a tide we're moving against. And to have a spiritual path and possibly a community that supports you and inspires you helps us to keep our direction, keep up our practice, keep an orientation towards this experience I'm talking about. So, one of the common ways people are suffering nowadays is from a sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness. It helps the heart, it helps the whole human being to be able to renew your sense of purpose, to renew your sense of contact with something real and strong within yourself. So a spiritual teaching, a spiritual path supports this. We might speculate that in past centuries and maybe in other cultures, there were more things in the outer world and in the culture that supported this kind of transcendent view of life. But the world as it is now, so many people know only the shallow satisfactions of consumerism, social media, games, shall we say, and people are living in a state of permanent distraction with nothing to really reconnect them with their own inner life. And if we're not connected with our own inner life, we're just lost in externals. And not only is it not satisfying, it's a kind of torment to live that way. People may take it as normal, as the normal state of being, but if you look closely, you see people are really suffering.
Well, they've had so many reports lately about the mental health impacts, particularly on young children who are introduced to screens from literally since they're babies. And there's a sort of numbness. It's kind of, we're not allowed to feel a spectrum or range of emotions anymore. It's only permissible to have life in the A lane, if you like, or everything's got to appear perfect.
You know, it's an inversion of values. What was high is now low, what was low is now high. And egoism, narcissism rule without question so often. And yet, all human beings recognize other human beings who are humble, who are cooperative, who share, who extend real friendship. So, yeah, there is a pervasive loss of true values, and these have been replaced by a world of false values. Social media and these various devices of distraction are part of the cause, but it is a culture of lost in entertainment, or what is considered entertainment, and lost in satisfying economic needs, working long hours in the Western world, for those who are lucky enough to have jobs. And it's a kind of slavery, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's even well-dressed slaves are still slaves. And few people, I shouldn't say few people question it, I think everybody questions it really, but people are not sure how to unslave themselves, you know, by developing some inner strength, by developing an attention that they have some control over. So what we pay attention to, what we give our hearts to is our own choice, and not just having our attention, you know, taken from us right and left by the consumer world and political and even religious conditioning.
You'd mentioned presence before. Can we just come back to that? Because I wanted to refer to a quote from Living Presence. In it you share that presence signifies the quality of consciously being here. It is the activation of a higher level of awareness that allows all of our other human functions, such as thought, feeling, and action, to be known, developed, and harmonized. Presence is the way in which we occupy space, as well as how we flow and move. It shapes our self-image and emotional tone. Presence determines the degree of our alertness, openness, and warmth. And it decides whether we leak and scatter our energy or embody and direct it. Can you expand for our viewers
That's
some
quite
more?
a mouthful. I guess I tried to pack a lot into one paragraph, and every sentence, every phrase deserves some unpacking here. But let's see if we can get to the essence of it. People are so often living just in their thoughts, or in their feelings, or in the cravings and sensations of the body, but rarely all at once. Usually it's this or that. You know, the intellectuals are in their head, and the emotional people are going through either dramas or great joys or whatever. And then there are people who are working out. That's the meaning of life for them, just to get their body in shape, be jogging or working out in the gym. Well, imagine a workout for a quality of awareness that is so comprehensive that it can simultaneously include thinking, feeling, sensation, action, behavior. And it can include all those things because the human consciousness can step behind all of that content and come to a state of presence. It's not unlike what is today called mindfulness or witnessing, but presence is something that every human being can experience, if only momentarily. And if you can experience it for a few moments, you can also develop it. When it's developed, it becomes something more continuous, sustained. It becomes, you know, sometimes we say you're centered or you're not centered. So to be centered in your heart, by the heart I mean the real center of your being, the real magnetic center of who you are. And from that emanates an awareness of the whole of yourself. And from that state of presence too, you can go inward, you can go very deep, you can go to the source of consciousness in yourself. This may sound far-fetched, it may sound like it's something only for some rare mystic, but I really believe it's for every human being to regain this capacity. And I haven't met anybody who couldn't be trained in this under the right circumstances. And as that grows, many things change. One of the important things that change is we're less enslaved to our own egoism. We're less enslaved to people's opinion of us. We're less reactive because we have something, we know the part of ourselves that's not reactive, that really can be at peace and can be, in a sense, grounded in a kind of internal strength and contentment and consciousness, the ability to see and pay attention and not be lost in our reactions, not be worrying what people think of us, not be fearful of, social condemnation. So presence, it's not exactly the enlightenment of the human being, but it is the beginning of a journey toward toward fulfillment, toward a relationship, finally, with the divine. Okay, the divine not as some theology, not as the possession of some particular religion, though certain religions do have a way of talking about it, but an experience and relationship with the divine that, in fact, was Rumi's subject, always, in everything he spoke and wrote. He's always talking about this infinite you. He's addressing this you. And it sounds as if it's a God outside himself, but it's not. It is the oneness of everything. It is the, if I may say so, it is the intelligence and love of an infinite universe, of an infinite field of love and intelligence that we're a part of. And there's no greater satisfaction than to feel yourself a part of that, to be in relationship to that, to be able to trust that. Now I'm going to take a little leap here and go beyond the story of the individual, who's self-improvement and more consciousness and more will and all these things we want to develop as human beings, if only just to be more effective and practical and balanced in life. All well and good. Very important to develop that side of ourselves. But there's something else going on. And I ask no one to believe this, but to test it and to see whether what I'm going to propose is true or not. And that is that we are born from a divine intelligence that set us into life in order that we could gradually develop the awareness, the consciousness, and love to appreciate this greater being, to be thankful that we exist, to be thankful for everything in life, for the light coming through this beautiful church window, for the sounds of the children playing in the playground, and to realize that everything in the outer existence is conspiring to wake us up and to be thankful and to trust that we are not living in an entirely random, accidental universe where bad things happen for meaningless reasons, but know that this intelligence, which could create at the level of microbiology and at the subatomic level, create this exquisite reality which is so complex and detailed, that intelligence is not only in the what we call the physical world, But that intelligence is operating in us, in all our relationships, shaping things, guiding things, and in a sense, conspiring for our own spiritual education. So this is pretty far out. And yet, this is what the saints have realized, and this is why they have been able to, as the saint might put it, surrender to God. Because there's nothing to fear. There's nothing that's going to happen to us, which, if we have the right, shall we say, trust, faith, consciousness, will not be for the betterment of our own souls, will not bring us a lesson. And there's no pain that we can experience, which, if embraced with gratitude and acceptance, will not be transformed into something else, something useful to the soul. So we started out with just presence. Let's not be asleep. Let's not be enslaved to whatever, social media and the devices of distraction. And now, eventually, we get to the point where every moment of our lives is potentially a spiritual teaching. Every day of our lives is a part of a curriculum designed by an infinite intelligence. We'd be stupid to doubt this intelligence. All we have to do is look at the physical world and it's there. But in reality, we must admit that what is most important to us are those things that are invisible. Outer things will never satisfy us. You could be the richest man in the world, and if you don't have a feeling of integrity in your own being, you're going to be unhappy, unless you're a psychopath, which is another case, which is a real possibility. But a healthy human being, what we value, what brings happiness and a sense of well-being, it's in our relationships, it's in our awakened awareness, it's in our own sense of conscience and integrity, it's in our own experience of beauty, not just outer beauty, but the love of beauty itself. And I mean, the inner world is so rich with these satisfactions, none of which are tangible. You can't point to these things. You can't just hold them up. You know, if I said to someone, "Do you love your mother?" and you say, "Yes," and I say, "Well, prove it to me." You know, it's internal.
I wanted to ask you about the Hadith Qudsi because many Sufi traditions refer to it, which is not the heavens nor earth can contain me.
Yes.
Only the heart of my humble servant.
Yes, yes.
Can contain.
So this is describing, in fact, our most precious faculty, the human heart, which is cognitive, which is a knowing substance, and which is our access to a world of qualities and meaning. And so the greatest education is the education of the heart, which is what Sufism is. So, and it's something practical. There is a whole curriculum for this, but it's also as much art as it is, you know, a systematic program. So every heart is different. Every heart has different capacities, and there are things that numb the heart. There are diseases of the heart. There's the hardening of the heart. But then there's also restoring the heart to health, increasing its sensitivity, and learning to see with the heart, see with the eye of the heart. And that changes so much. It opens up so much more beauty. So we need institutions, or maybe not institutions, but we need an education of the heart in many forms. And I suppose there are different attempts to do this. I think the arts at their best can do this. I think spiritual practice ideally can do this. Religion, no guarantee. Religion can just as well damage the heart, numb it, or turn it into a negative state in some cases. But religion at its best can teach us gratitude, reverence, humility. But my love of Sufism, and particularly the lineage of Jalaluddin Rumi, and it's why I stand where I stand today, it's a comprehensive, deep, beautiful, beautifully expressed teaching about human possibilities, the possibilities of this incredible heart we've all been given.
It's interesting at the moment because over the last 2 or 3 decades there's been an explosion of wellness, well-being, mindfulness, lots of different types of meditation techniques and tools. And I was reflecting a bit more on how a tradition that's steeped in tradition, in history, that has survived almost the test of time,
Yes.
where its place is today. And what is it that Rumi can offer that we can't find, let's say, in a different, sort of more generic, if you like,
Okay, good.
meditation program?
All of these things that you mentioned are wonderful, and often they're correctives. They're at least correctives to a somewhat pathological situation. A person who can't concentrate, who can't slow down. Oh, slow down. Watch your breath. Notice your thoughts. And begin to meditate and find a deeper part of yourself. So these correctives are useful. But no technique alone is sufficient. Every strategy of the ego, every attempt to use technique is partial, incomplete. Something's missing. It's still reliance on our own isolated individual self, attempting to meet the needs of that self. So, what Rumi offers in an extraordinary way is a teaching so high and so complete, so subtle and transcendent. It's awesome. It's an awesome. What he expects us to understand is awesome. But ultimately, it's not a mountain of personal achievement to be climbed. It's something else. And I think I could best express this by sharing with you a short selection from his poetry that captures this. Shall we do that?
Yes, please.
Rumi says, "The only thing worth pursuing is love. And yet love is not caught in any trap of yours. You would be fortunate to find yourself God's prey, to get free of your own traps and fall into his. Love is whispering into my ear. To be a prey is better than to be a hunter. Make yourself my fool. Renounce the high status of the sun and become a speck. Come, dwell at my door and be homeless. Don't pretend to be a candle. be a moth. So you may taste the savor of life and contemplate the sovereignty hidden in servanthood. All our selfish strategies, including our selfish strategies for self-improvement, are insufficient. At a certain stage of life, they're appropriate. But the absolute surrender and trust in divine guidance, trust in life itself, comes through this making yourself nothing. Everybody wants to be something and someone. That's the, right, isn't that the whole scheme of social media? Yeah. And you're not really becoming someone, you're just creating a virtual someone, an online someone, like you're with your latest selfie, and look, I just came from whatever, Barcelona, and look at me eating this and all this stuff. Become nothing. But to become nothing is a very high achievement. It's not achieved by people who never attained will. It's not achieved by people who never mastered their own attention. So it is in fact the final stage of human development. It is the highest development of the self, to be able to offer the self to the flow of life, to be a moth circling around that divine candle, the divine light. I realize that this may just sound like poetry to some. It may be beautiful poetry. One might even listen to it with a degree of skepticism. But I believe Rumi lived this, because I have seen people live this truth and be the better for it. I've seen them lose their fears, lose their neediness, lose their need for self-justification, for outer approval, for security, and just welcome divine guidance and find satisfaction in simple being of presence. It's an art, it's a discipline, it's a joy. It's what the great saints have achieved, and yet someone who attains this doesn't think, oh, now I'm a great saint. The thought doesn't occur. You know, we're talking about it now, of course, because it's been my life, it's been my work in a sense, to analyze this first from the literature, from the tradition, to be able to articulate it in order to create the circumstances in which people can realize this truth, to bring them to a resonance, or to come into resonance with a certain, shall we say, cosmic energy, with a certain cosmic love. And only by coming into that resonance does this reality manifest, does the possibility of true servanthood appear. So this is, I know of no example in world literature where this possibility is expressed as beautifully, as completely, as thoroughly as in Rumi. And this becoming nothing and becoming no one is also the attainment of a kind of love that doesn't make demands, that doesn't need to be loved in return, and that transforms the human being so that the human being becomes a source of love. This happened to me when I met an 80-something-year-old man in Konya back in 1980 approximately. And he was very ordinary, very, very ordinary, humble, and yet one felt this radiant love just take over any situation he entered into. He could be in an international airport, just sitting there, smoking a cigarette back in those days, in his three-piece suit, and people would just want to kind of come up and start talking to him. And without any presumption, without any airs. And he claimed nothing for himself, of course. He always pointed to Rumi and said, it's not me, it's, I received this blessing through my love for Rumi. So it's not just the words, it's not just the literature, as great as the literature it is, it's a transmission of something. It's a vibration that we come into resonance with. And that contributes more to the transformation than anything else. But it's beautiful to have some knowledge. It's beautiful to have poetry, which is the language of the soul. It makes it more real. That also helps in realizing that reality.
In terms of the everyday nitty-gritty situations,
Yes.
Those moments where we really are called upon into the opportunity of our growth, but yet in that very moment, there's so much being held in it. It's often, my own experience, Kabir, is that when we come into a more contained space, it's much easier to feel that vibration and resonance of love than integrating that in the mud, Not all the time do you get the lotus flower. Sometimes you still just get the mud. And I guess for those that are sort of watching that love the feel and can, feel what you're sharing, but are thinking, well, that's well and good, but I've got to feed my kids, I've got to pay the mortgage, I've got to...
Worse yet, I have to put up with all these people who are making my life unpleasant.
Right. So, what words of Rumi come to heart?
I was joking, by the way. I didn't mean I have to put up with all these people, but this is what the ego says. And my ego says it too. In life, there are conflicts among different personalities and egos. And that's because we all have our distortions. Everyone has a viewpoint which to some extent is a distortion of the truth. And what we should be striving for is a less distorted experience of life, an experience of life that is less limited by our own limited and often selfish perspective. So many of the conflicts we encounter in life are conflicts that are due to the distortions, banging up against each other and rubbing each other wrong and so forth. So the work is to remove those distortions and judgments and resentments and replace them with love. But not just a sentimental love, not just a love that overlooks the realities of what we're facing, because there also has to be justice. And justice has to be aligned with truth. You can't have truth without justice and justice without truth. So moving beyond distortion to the truth in order to live with justice can allow a human being to act with strength, to make choices, to stand up for certain things, to let go of other things. often also to reconcile conflicts that are the result of distortions, where truth and balance can't be attained. So, Prophet Muhammad, for instance, to give one example, he said, speak the truth even if it be against yourself. Okay? We have to integrate principles like this, to be fastidious and objective about ourselves and our faults and weaknesses, not to justify them, rationalize them, or defend them. And little by little, this frees us of that toxic egoism, which creates problems. We want to be we want to grow into the kind of people that wherever we go, peace radiates and problems are naturally solved. Rumi said something amazing. He said, be the kind of person who, when you walk into a room, good luck goes to the person who needs it. You could say good luck or blessing goes to the person who needs it. So people in this, a human being in this state radiates something positive. And in that state, reconciliations can happen. So this is another effect of this development that we're talking about. The more we grow into that state, the more the messiness of life is just material for our own learning about ourselves, and material that awakens qualities that would be dormant if we weren't faced with these challenges. Unfortunately, people are often thinking, for many people, the unconscious rationale of life is, I would like to live forever in an undisturbed state. And anything that disturbs me, I'm going to get angry about, or I'm going to judge and blame. But at a certain point, and this is part of the teaching, you realize, I don't ever expect to be in a completely undisturbed state. I mean, something always arises, some disappointment, some friction, some bill that didn't get paid, or some delivery that wasn't made, or some disappointment in a relationship. This is continuous, but do we roll with it? Do we accept it? Do we refuse to blame, the other and say, you're the reason for my unhappiness? So again, we're coming back to the inner life. How do we develop that inner life which is not reactive, which does not blame, which does not cause problems? The flip side of this is that sometimes there are human beings with a tendency that wherever they go, they cause problems because they're always finding something wrong. And they never notice that every time there's a problem, it's because they're there. Shamsi Tabriz, Rumi's mentor, says, the people of God are light as a feather.
One of the quotes that's always travelled with me actually since I first learned about Sufism is Ibn Arabi's quote, where he shares, my heart holds within it every form. It contains a pasture for gazelles, a monastery for Christian monks. There is a temple for idol worshippers, a holy shrine for pilgrims. There is the table of the Torah and the book of the Quran. I follow the religion of love and go whichever way his camel leads me. His is the true faith. This is the true religion. For a lot of Muslims, actually, including myself, the Islam that we grew up with, Kabir, was very fear-based. We were taught, you have to do this or you go to hell. And it took actually coming to Sufism and learning about Rumi to suddenly cultivate a very different relationship with Islam. And I'm curious about what more you can share about these words from Ibn Arabi and about this universality, if you like, of this tradition.
People like Ibn Arabi reach a state of the heart in which they see the divine mercy manifesting in all these forms. The divine mercy that gave birth to existence. And it's manifesting in all religions, not equally and necessarily, but it's manifesting, the mercy is everywhere. And so he felt that, and he felt this is the religion of love. It's very different from the religion of fear. Human beings create the religion of fear. God does not create the religion of fear. Every religion that I know of has degraded over time, or aspects of it have degraded over time, as human opinion, human negativity and egoism enters into religion, and it becomes perhaps a control system. It becomes a manifestation of people's own darkness, and it gets built upon. It becomes like they build a structure based on these errors, and the errors are compounded the more they build their structure on it, till finally you have a whole structure of untruth, of a religion of terror, a religion of fear, and justified with fear, and it becomes a means of threatening people to be good, except it doesn't necessarily lead to good behavior. So, very simply, the religion of fear is a false religion. The religion of love, which Ibn Arabi is referring to, is the religion beyond religions. And it is the religion of the lover. There's no higher state than the lover of God. The lover has a different religion, follows different rules. He or she may abide in the beautiful everyday practices of Islam, which can deepen that religion of love, if they're approached in the right way, and if they're understood as a spiritual training program, and if they're understood as a way of coming into relationship with the divine, then they're useful. But finally, coming back to this essential religion of love, knowing that love is the answer to every problem and every real question that arises in the course of life. Intellect raises countless questions. Love is almost always the answer to those questions. And as we say, solve your problems with love. Have you tried using other things? Have you tried using fear? Have you tried using anger? How has that worked out for you? You get angry at your friends or at your spouse, or you get resentful. What problems does that solve? I'm not talking about when you're hurt and disappointed, holding back, and stuffing your pain and your hurt. That's not what I mean. Communication is important among friends. We should be able to say, especially in our tradition, within 3 days of being hurt or disappointed, you go to the person directly and try to work it out. That's our spiritual obligation. But even that has to be motivated by love, not motivated by, I'm going to convince that person that I'm right and they're wrong. You go try and reconcile in the name of love. So, Ibn Arabi glimpsed that religion of love Rumi glimpsed it as well, and he expressed it so beautifully in this poem that goes something like, love is reckless, not reason. Reason always seeks a profit, but love comes on strong, consuming herself unabashed. Yet in the midst of suffering, love is hard-surfaced and straightforward like a millstone. God gave us being. Without regret, give it back again. Gambling yourself away is beyond any religion. Religion seeks grace and favor, but those who gamble these away are God's favorites, for they neither put God to the test nor knock at the door of gain and loss. So Rumi is saying, in love, be reckless, be bold. God loves that boldness. Religion seeks grace and favor, the pious one, hoping to gain some merit from the divine. It's not so bad, not such a bad thing. But Rumi is telling us the one who just sort of blows it all away and says, I'm just going to gamble myself away. I'm going to spend myself freely without counting the cost to myself. That's the flow of the divine. That's the cosmic divine flowing through the human being. And that's something quite extraordinary and miraculous. Rumi lived that way. Very few people do. But it's possible.
I feel like I just want to end on that note, but it's possible.
Inshallah, make a call.
Inshallah, yeah.
This is another thing that Rumi teaches. We are helpless. We are nothing, really. Yeah. There is no power nor agency except from that cosmic life, that divine source. So, ask of that source for your needs, for your true spiritual needs to be met. Don't be nibbling with little trivial needs, like I need this, I need that, I wish I had. No, make your needs something noble and great so that that divine ocean will well up, and overwhelm you with its love and beauty and make you part of itself.
Yeah, and I've often witnessed how when we commit to serving something much bigger than ourselves, a cause or a charity, the will meets you in a way that you just would never imagine. Yes. Miracles just open in abundance. Yes. Because it's serving something more than just yourself.
Yes. Another way to put that, this is a good example, is to say that these mystical teachings, which are so, they sound crazy. Sometimes. To some people, I'm sure it sounds crazy. But really, these are the spiritual laws. These are the axiomatic principles for relating to the totality of reality, of which we are part. And these bold ideas really are keys to how to unlock the secrets of reality, how to unlock the generosity and beauty of the divine. And that's the whole purpose for our being here, embodied in existence, is simply to know the true extent, the true dimensions of God's beauty, intelligence, and generosity.
I've been on one of your retreats, the Costa Rica retreat, which was just incredible. It felt like opening up to this complete cosmic portal and experiencing something in a very sort of deep soul level. It was like a little mini sort of awakening. Can you just tell us a bit more about these retreats and the intention first of all, the intention that you had when you came up with them, and what you found has shifted for others. I mean, you've done many of them, so what have you witnessed has shifted for people attending and
Beautiful.
coming into them?
So we just finished a retreat 2 days ago, and the subject was resonance. And it was with a community of people. The majority of people were people who have experience in this tradition. And the purpose of the retreat is to create a context, a situation in which the beauties of Rumi's tradition can be experienced and lived. And you need people who are sort of capable of maintaining a certain quality of attention, bringing their love to the situation, bringing some openness and reverence to it. And then the rest happens pretty naturally. We have certain practices that we do that are just naturally help to create that resonance and to diminish the false self. And by now, this comes relatively easy for people, and the tendency is just for the whole community to rise and to ascend in vibration to something very fine and subtle. The Costa Rica Writers' Retreat was an experiment to do something without any even religious or spiritual labels. It wasn't at first intended as a spiritual retreat. It was intended as an opportunity for people with an interest in writing, literature, creativity, to explore creativity and the arts and their own self-expression, of course within a spiritual context. But we weren't focusing on religious literature or Sufi poems primarily. And yet, because the people who came to that event were people who, majority of whom had already been trained in Sufism, there was sort of like no holding them down, you know. And we were in an environment that was so pristine. We could have been on another planet because there were no obvious signs of worldliness, you know, of the distractions of a resort, you know, a tourist site. No, just pristine nature for miles around us. And we were there with that one purpose, just to explore meaning and beauty. And I think we were all shocked at what happened, you know, and it happened so naturally. It happened so effortlessly. And to me, that's a sign of, and proof of the divine generosity that it's easy, in a sense, it's easy. If we remove the distractions, if we remove the things that are holding us down, we naturally rise, and people sort of naturally fall in love, you know. And I mean in a non-romantic, non-personal way. We were in that vibration of love, and we shared our words. And we rode horses, and we swam in the surf. It was a beautiful experiment to find out that, and I think it was because people came with a background of discipline, a background of spiritual courtesy, a background of friendship, that all the conditions was just ready. You know, then we just had to be and live and be human, just be human. And we found that being human is the most spiritual thing.
I mean, I remember the first time in 2008, the first words I heard at your retreat in Naarden, actually in Holland, was what God said to the rose and caused it to laugh in full-blown beauty. He said to my heart, and made it 1,000 times more beautiful. Rumi's words. And this path is extremely beautiful. But there is pain, and it would be good to just have that caution.
Yeah.
Because it also, you know, you're forced to look into the mirror, and not all of it is pleasing. And the ego is deceptive, and can keep presenting itself.
And this is what distinguishes it from narcissism, from a practice of narcissism, which is just pleasing the self in every way possible. So yes, this path is for, in a way, spiritual warriors. Again, it's about becoming nothing. It's holding on to nothing. And I don't want to make it sound scary, but that's part of it. There are times when we see ourselves more clearly than we've ever seen ourselves before, and look at our lives, and it's sort of poignant to look at our lives from that perspective. We know something's got to change. We know we can't go back to the way things were. But there's so many teachings about the infinite compassion of existence, and that is the nature of reality. And it's all right for us to feel some personal remorse. It's all right. It's a good, healthy thing to feel our faultiness, our imperfection. That gets enfolded into the total divine perfection. If we didn't have that imperfection, we might be stuck in pride and false values. It's only because we have reason to be humble and to try to be authentic and real.
Thank you so much, Kabir, for joining us today. It certainly has been extremely educational and enlightening. Thank you. And for anyone watching that is interested in learning more about Kabir and his wife Camille's work, please do go to their website, www.sufism.org.